All right. Welcome back, everybody, from a long break. This is the Finance Essentials Podcast, and I am your host, Danny Hudson. I really want to apologize. I know we've gone about 2 weeks now without a show. I have heard a few people complain, which is good, right? That means that some people at least like hearing from me on a weekly basis, which is always great to hear. Work has just been crazy. Week before last, it was about 70 hours or so. This week it wasn't quite as bad, but also long, and we've been commuting back and forth to the office, and kind of being on call where if I need to be on there to be able to explain something or to show something, or if senior leadership doesn't like the way something is viewed, or it's confusing, or things along those lines. It's just been crazy. We're going through budget season. And I know we kind of talked briefly about it with my guest host from a couple weeks ago, I guess longer than that now, Miss Elizabeth Crouch. Budget season as far as finance goes is the busiest time of the year. There's not a lot of free time. We're basically taking in inputs from all of the different businesses. We're rolling all that up to senior leadership. Senior leadership basically says your story sucks and it's crap. Send it all back down. So we send it all back down, and then we work it all out, and then we send something back up, and then they eventually get to the point where they approve it, and then that ends up being our budget for the next year. And then that's important up until about March or April, when we don't like those numbers anymore, and then we change it to something else, and then that's ends up being the story for the rest of the year. So that's kind of the process that we're going through right now. I really want to appreciate you guys' patience and thank you for bearing with me. It's always great to hear that people did miss hearing from me. Everybody always likes to be, liked, and it's nice to know that people appreciate, the work that I end up putting into the show every week. So thank you guys for that. So this week, the topic that I'm going to review, you guys may not necessarily agree with some of the things that I have to say, which is okay, right? I mean, that's important. That's part of this dialogue, this interaction that we have with each other. It's very important for you. It's very important for me that we do happen to hear viewpoints and perspectives, that are outside of our own wheelhouse, because that's what helps us think, right? And then that's what helps drive conversation. So there might be some things that I say, that will go along those lines, and that we might not necessarily agree on. And again, just to give you guys a little bit of insight, I'm a finance-oriented brain. That's how I typically tend to approach everything, and that's the lens that I tend to view the world. Some people might agree, some people don't. That's just how I operate. If you don't like it, that's okay. Let me know. I'm always open to conversations, but just remember, I got this guy, and as long as I've got that guy, that makes me right. So feel free to share what you think. But as long as I got that guy, I'm the one that's right. But no, feel free to share. So as you guys may know, especially if you follow me on social media, and have listened to the show in the past, one of the things that we've talked a lot about is, obviously it dominates the news, which is COVID, right? So COVID, business impacts, financial impacts, again, we review that on a pretty weekly basis. Hopefully it'll get to the point where we can kind of look at and review a lot of other things, but as long as it's continuing to dominate the news, and there's huge financial impacts, it's going to end up coming up in conversation. So, I hope it's something that you guys can bear with me, but it's impacting businesses, right? I mean, Disney's laying off about 30,000 employees. Airlines are continuing to furlough and lay off people. I know Expedia recently also announced a round of layoffs. So it really is changing the business environment, as we know it. So this week, what I wanted to do is go into something that most people don't necessarily think about as much. Part of it is the fact that we live here in the U.S. In living in the U.S., we are very privileged. When it comes to life, when it comes to freedoms, when it comes to the ability to be able to have these types of discussions and disagreements, we really are, a cut above the rest. So no matter what you see on the news, no matter what you read about on social media, all of that stuff aside, the fact that we live here in the United States really puts us at an advantage over just about anybody else in the entire world. So the story that I'm going on today, it's not from Fee. As much as I love the foundation of economic education, this article is not from Fee. So you guys out there can be like, finally, he's gotten away from from Fee. He leans on them as his crutch every single week, and now we get to listen to something else. So this one actually comes from NPR, and it's based around a UN report. And the title of it is UN report says pandemic could push up to 132 million people into hunger. It's by Austin Horn. It came out a couple of weeks ago on NPR, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I know I took some advice from some folks, and I don't have my notes. I don't have my notes printed out anymore. As you guys can see, I don't have any papers, so I actually have everything up on a screen as far as my notes, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to hit on some key points here. And he says, the coronavirus pandemic could push up to 132 million people into hunger by the end of 2020, according to a new report from the United Nations. As progress in fighting hunger stalls, the COVID-19 pandemic is intensifying the vulnerabilities and inadequacies of global food systems, UNICEF said in a statement. While it is too early to assess the full impact of the lockdowns and other containment measures, at least another 83 million people and as possibly as many as 132 million may go hungry in 2020. And then they go on to say, they do expect an economic recovery in 2021, but they're not sure exactly kind of how much, of a recovery we're going to see. And then they go on to kind of compare that to historicals. So, for example, they go on to say world hunger was declining before 2014, and now they were estimating that they had about 690 million malnourished people in 2019. So, this is the type of conversation that nobody really wants to have. I see very few people in the news. I read about very few people that talk about the impacts of the lockdowns, commerce restrictions, things along those lines that are restricting the ability to create value, to sell your product, your value, whatever it might be, and then to be able to purchase goods, to be able to be able to purchase services, and all of this impacts supply chains, right? From the farmers all the way down to the aid that gets distributed. And then the next story here is actually even harder to read. But I think it's important. I think it's important that we're all aware. It's important that we know. And then again, approaching things from a finance perspective, I'm going to tie this back into the overarching theme of the show, and then that's how we can talk about it, right? Because what we're going to talk about today is, what is your responsibility and what is my responsibility? The fact that we live in a place where we can be so comfortable, that we don't have to worry about these types of things. So the next one is coronavirus-linked hunger kills 10,000 children per month, says the UN. This one's by the Associated Press on MSN. So it says more than 550,000 additional children each month are being struck by what is called wasting or malnutrition that manifests in spindly limbs, distended bellies, according to the UN. Wasting and stunting can permanently damage children physically and mentally. The food security effects of the COVID crisis are going to reflect many years from now. Dr. Francesco Branca, the WHO head of nutrition. There is going to be a societal effect. But even more than lack of money, restrictions on movement have prevented families from seeking treatment, said Victor Aguayo, head of UNICEF's nutrition program. By having schools closed, by having primary health care services disrupted, by having nutritional programs dysfunctional, we are also creating harm. He cites examples of near global suspension of vitamin A supplements, which are crucial to bolster developing immune systems. And then they talk about a few examples. Afghanistan, which is now in the red zone of hunger, with severe childhood malnutrition spiking from 690,000 in January to 780,000 in August, a 13% increase. Yemen, which is a big one. Yemen, it says restrictions on movement have blocked aid distribution, along with stalling of salaries and price hikes. The Arab world's poorest country is suffering further from a fall in remittance and a drop in funding from humanitarian agencies. Yemen is now on the brink of famine, according to the Famine Early Warning Systems Network, which uses survey satellite data, so on and so forth. Some of the worst hunger still occurs in sub-Saharan Africa. In Sudan, 9.6 million people live from one meal to the next, a 65% increase from the same time last year. Lockdowns across Sudanese provinces and around the world have dried up work and income for millions. With inflation hitting 136%, prices for basic goods have more than tripled. So I don't think I've made it a secret. If you guys do follow us on social media, if you guys have tuned into some previous podcasts, I'm not a huge fan of government mandated lockdowns. I'm not a huge fan of us or having an outside entity telling people how they can and if they can operate, because there's always unintended side consequences, right? There's always unintended consequences, and part of that is, you read stories about how farmers are having to throw crops away. They're having to burn fields, they're having to do whatever because of supply chain breakdowns, and they're not able to get food out to where it needs to go, and as a result, it just rots, and there's nothing that they can do about that. And stories and articles like these show what possible consequences are. I mean, we live in a very fragile system. Everybody at this point, as far as globally goes, we're all tied together in some way, shape, or form. If it means that somehow potatoes from Idaho get ground into potato flour and donated to humanitarian effects in sub-Saharan Africa, when we just say, hey, you guys are going into quarantine, or you guys are doing this, you're not allowed to operate like this is the type of the results from that. I'm sure probably a lot of you remember whenever COVID first started happening, and you went to the grocery store, and you may still see it, where there's a shortage of hand sanitizer, or there's a shortage of toilet paper, or there's a shortage of paper towels, or at the beginning it was a shortage of meat. A lot of meat was gone. I know that beef supply chains were also impacted, so there was a period of time where you couldn't go to the store and find cuts of beef that you were looking for. Now think about it from our perspective, where we live in a country that produces a lot of that, and if we're running into shortages and we're having accessibility issues, just imagine 3, 4, 5 links down of how these supplies and these goods would normally get distributed. I mean, they're not even close, right? I mean, some of these, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and other places, that stuff gets put on boats, right? And it takes months to get to these folks. And so when we have lockdowns and we have shutdowns, and they have lockdowns and they have shutdowns, you're getting nothing but supply chain disruptions all the way from the top all the way to the bottom. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's small children that are really impacted. So I know you guys are probably thinking, all right, Danny, you said you were going to figure out a way of being able to tie this into finance, right? Because that's what this podcast is about. It's about finance. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to take this information and these stories and these reports and tie them back into, what can we do? And I'm not talking about we as in the United States government. I'm not talking about we as in the UN. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what can you as the listener, and what can I as, the podcaster, but we're all part of a very privileged class. And I know a lot of you have been seeing the news lately about taxes, right? A while back, everybody wanted to take money from the billionaires, and then everybody wanted to take money from the millionaires. And now the new number that's being thrown around is the 400,000. People who make more than $400,000 a year, they make too much money. We should increase their taxes. Well, I wanted to help put that into perspective. What is $400,000? What does that mean? Is that top 1%? What does that mean? And so what I wanted to do is actually tell you guys and break down what it means to be that type of earner, and how that actually shakes out in the global perspective, and then how can we use that information to not only make ourselves more successful, but how can we become more benevolent, right? How can we take what we know and what we've learned, and how can we make ourselves become more successful to be able to help impact some of these issues that we talked about in some of the other stories. So what I wanted to do is, the next one is actually a story. It's from Financial Samurai. It's a little dated, so the numbers are probably not quite 100% accurate, but I think they're in the ballpark. But the title was, How Much Money Do the Top Income Earners Make? And so what this did was it broke down the tiers of income earners in the United States to help provide some perspective as far as, where you might be and where I might be, and what it takes to get to that next level. So what they say is that the top 1% of income earners in the US is about $380,000. So again, round up, it's about 400,000, which that seems to be the number that seems to be kind of floating around in the news. But after that, I think a lot of these numbers are going to surprise you guys. The top 5% makes about $160,000 a year. The top 10% make about $115,000 a year. The top 25% is only about $67,000. And the top 50%, so keep in mind, this is top 50% of income earners in the United States only makes $33,000 a year. $33,000 a year puts you in the top 50% of income earners in the United States. Now, the stories we talked about earlier, for the most part, they're not in the U.S., right? They're more of a global circumstance or a global situation. Still very important, just because they're an ocean away doesn't mean they don't exist. But now, what does that mean globally? If I'm in the top 50% and I'm only making $33,000 a year in the U.S., what does that mean in the world? So what I did was I found another article. This one's from the Daily Mail, and it's by Hugo Guy, and the title of it is "America is the 1%. You need just $34,000 annual income to be in the global elite, and half of the world's richest people live in the U.S." Now that part blew my mind. Now, this article was a little older. I think it was 2014, mainly because it was hard to find an updated version, and it laid everything out kind of the way I liked. My guess is that it's probably a little bit different now. Obviously, there's been a huge boom in China's middle class, so my guess is that they're probably taking on a lot more than they probably did whenever this article was originally written. But I mean, say it's still 40%, right? If it goes from half of the world's richest people live in the United States to 40%, 40% of the world's richest people live in the United States, and maybe that number goes up, right? That number goes up to what, 36,000, 37,000? It's not that significant of a change. And so a couple of the other points that were in here that I really thought, hit home and help put this into perspective is that half of the top 1% live in the United States. And then it says that the global median income is about $1,200 per year. So if you think about that, right, if $1,200 per year, that's about what, $100 a month? People live on about $100 a month. Which is, most of us would look at that and go, oh my God. Now, again, it adjusts for costs of living, and that kind of thing. But still, I mean, that is, almost nothing. So how do I tie this back into finance, right? You guys are now you're thinking, I have been listening to you for 20 minutes talk about stuff that's not really that finance related. But I am going to tie it back, and I'm going to tie it back because I want to let you guys know, as part of the 1% globally, you have a responsibility and I have a responsibility, and the people that we know, we have a responsibility because we have the means, we have the education, we have the resources. It is our responsibility, my responsibility, your responsibility, to be as successful as we possibly can. And I'll provide a little bit of context, but let me say that again. You and I and we have a responsibility to be as successful as we possibly can be. And the reason for that is because there are people out there that are in sub-Saharan Africa, and they're in Afghanistan, and they're in Yemen, that do not have the means or the abilities, or the resources to be able to do and have access to the types of things that we do. And so you have a responsibility, and I have a responsibility to make as much money as we can, to provide benefits and provide aid to the types of people that can't. To give you a little bit of a story, I know a lot of you guys have probably been reading stories, and you've seen reports about school lunches, right? A lot of people in the U.S. depend on school lunches. Kids do, as part of their daily meals, their daily nutrition. That, and then especially too, now that certain unemployment rates are coming out, there's places in New York City now that have upwards of 30% unemployment. These are the types of people that are going to be using food banks. They're going to be using any type of charity services that they can. And Jason Stapleton actually brought up a really good point one time when he said that the best thing that you can do, and that I can do, and that we can do, the best thing that we can do to help those people that are in bread lines and they go to food banks is to not be one of them, right? Don't be the type of person, and don't be one of the people that has to rely on those types of places to provide sustenance, because the resources are constrained. We live in a world of scarcity. I know that when we talk about things like the Fed and the amount of money that the Fed prints and that kind of thing, they like to pretend that scarcity is not a real thing. But until we live in Star Trek, scarcity will continue to exist. And as long as scarcity exists, we're all going to be vying for resources. And the best thing, like I said, and I'll say it again, the best thing that we can do to help out those people in those circumstances is not be one of them. And this is the part I think that really ties back to finance, because if you're a person who's listening to this show, you're a person who's watching it on YouTube, I'm driving home and I'm making the point that, when it comes to understanding the financial health of your business, and even on the personal side, or the place of employment that you're at, I know we talked about this before, where if you're working at a company where you don't know if they're going to be able to survive, or they're going to be able to transition, or they're going to be able to pivot to continue to succeed, it's your responsibility to either find ways to make it better, or it's on you and your responsibility to increase your skills, your talents, to maybe pivot to something else yourself. Or it's up to you to be able to leave that and go somewhere else that's going to be able to provide for you and your family without necessarily having to rely on somebody else. Because the best thing you can do is not be one of those people. And when you're not one of those people, what it does do, though, is it gives you the flexibility to choose where you put your money, where you put your wealth, to help those who are less fortunate. I'm one of those people where, I won't go too far down the political route, but I'm a big supporter of refugees. I'm a big supporter of immigrants. And the main reason for that is very similar to the articles that we talk about, is that a lot of those people don't have resources. They're literally saying it is worth it for me to risk dying to put myself in a better situation for me and for my family. And I think that those are the types of people who really need all the support and all the aid that we can provide. So, for example, one of the big places that I like to donate to is through Kiva. Kiva, what they do is they are in a lot of war torn, very poor developing countries that don't necessarily have access to proper financing. They don't have access to banks, and what they do is they provide out microloans. They provide microloans at 0% or very, very low interest rates, 1% or something like that, to people, who happen to need them. So, for example, you might find somebody in, the Congo, right, where it's been, civil war there going on for decades, and they need a new supply of seed for their crops, for their fields, and they might only need $600. And you could donate up to 20, as little as 25, or you can donate all of it, if you want. And then over a period of time, what you find is you get $1 here and $1 there and $2 here, that comes back, and then it allows you to loan that back out again. But what these are is these are people who are wanting to produce. They are wanting to be able to provide, and they are working to try to provide value for their families, for their markets, so on and so forth. And then it allows me to be able to actually take what has been provided to them, they supply back. And if they don't provide it back, then it's not that big of a deal, right? Because you know where that money went, who you were helping, and that to me, it screams volumes. So again, tying this back to the finance message of the podcast, right? When we talk about being able to understand the finances of your business, the finances of your company, and even your personal finances, when you're looking at making capital investments, when you're looking at trying to grow your top line, by 10%, or your bottom line by 10%, when you're trying to understand what are ways that I can cut costs out of my system to be able to make more money. And that's not bad. Those are the types of things that we should be focused on. Those are the types of things that mean the world to people who don't necessarily have the ability to be able to do that. We have the ability in the US, well, a lot of us do, where we can say, is it worth spending money on this, or is it worth spending money on this? And if one of those is feeding your family, and then the other one is taking a vacation, it's pretty hands down as far as which one people are going to take. But that's the importance of finance, right? That's the point of listening to this podcast. That's the point that I try to make, to you guys every day whenever I'm posting online and whenever I'm doing these shows is that when you have the ability to be able to understand your finances, then you have the ability to be able to go above and beyond and help the people that don't. Whether it's mentoring or participating with a refugee organization or maybe even in your local community. If you're in a particularly torn part of the U.S. where lockdowns have hit particularly hard, maybe you can help people in your own backyard. That's just as valuable as well. So one of the things that I wanted to do to bring it back to me, because it's all about me, is I know I talked about it on the last show, how I'm actually not going to do, my first class is going to be in February, but after thinking about it, talking with some folks, what I'm actually going to try to do is I'm actually going to try to put out kind of a sneak peek webinar. I'm working on, had delays a little bit because of work, but what I'm actually working on is putting together a webinar. It'll be about a 1 hour, 1 hour webinar that I'm hoping to potentially do probably sometime in early December. It's going to be about an hour long, and what it's going to be is it's going to be about a 30,000 foot snapshot of the very general Finance 101 principles that we really teach in the course and that we use to help out, business owners and large corporations and things along those lines to help you get your foot in the door. It's going to be super cheap. I mean, it'll probably be like $20, $25, something along those lines. So it'll be super cheap. Hopefully it'll be super valuable. But what I really wanted to do is provide a snapshot and a quick rundown quickly to you guys that'll be able to help provide some value and help get you down the right path. For example, if you're one of those folks where, that they read about in the news a lot, where if you had a $500 bill, come up and you couldn't afford to pay for it, this type of a course I think is going to be super valuable for folks like that are going to be able to explain in a very simplistic terms basic finance. Because I think what happens is a lot of people, when they think, oh well, what if what if I cut out my Netflix subscription, or what if I cut out you know Friday night pizza, or whatever small luxury you might have in your life. At the end of the day, that's not really going to make that big of a difference. Maybe your problem is that your top line is just not big enough. And maybe that means you need to learn extra skills. Maybe that means that you need to broaden your horizons as far as your type of business. Maybe it means that you need to change up your business mix to help increase your revenues, to be able to focus more on the bottom line and the profitability. But I mean, if you're sitting there and you're trying to find out ways to save 10, 20, 50, $100, chances are it's not a cost thing. Chances are it's probably a revenue thing. And you need to find a way to make more money, not necessarily to be able to cut out costs. But those are the types of things that I'm going to try to touch on real briefly as far as the webinar goes. And then obviously, if it's something that's interesting, then it goes into the classes, and then we're going to dive more into detail on some of those. So stay tuned. I should have some more details on that in upcoming shows. Again, thank you guys. I know this one was a little bit more of a personal issue to me. It was pretty important to me. It was a little bit different than shows that I've done previously. Again, as always, I welcome and appreciate any feedback that you guys have to provide, or maybe if you disagree. If you disagree with some of the things, share that with me. Like I said, we're on all the social media platforms. We have the email right there at the bottom of the website, which is financeessentials.io. Check out the website. The podcast is there, and you can submit feedback there as well. We welcome all of that. And if you like what I had to say today, share it with a friend, hit like, subscribe on YouTube, or subscribe on SoundCloud, wherever you're able to find the podcast too, or leave a review. If you didn't like the show, maybe you don't want to leave a review because maybe that won't look so good on me. But if you liked it, leave a review, leave some feedback, hit subscribe, and share it with a friend if you think somebody else could find it valuable. So thank you again. I appreciate you guys bearing with me for about the last 30 minutes or so. And you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.